So I really enjoyed this because Saylor was good with it. The host was asking him tough questions, and it was about 2 hours long, full of good information. And this was one that really stuck out for me. And I saw that Joe Burnett posted something about it this morning, so I wanted to watch it as well. And it is Saylor's waterfall theory, or waterfall analogy, I should say. So let's watch this. I'll put it on one and a bit speed. Oh, what did I do? 1.5 is probably too fast. Okay, let's get this up. Let's listen to Saylor's waterfall analogy here. Are you all in on the chair? Yeah, that's who it was. That was it wasn't this interview though. That was a couple years ago, right? But it is the same guy.
Michael Saylor recently shared one of his best analogies I've ever heard about Bitcoin. I think it's one of his most powerful clips, so I'm going to play it for you right now. After that, I'll add some additional commentary. Here's the clip.
But I think where people trip up with your language is this idea of the inevitability of the 60%. What would you say to that?
So we're dealing with three concepts: risk, volatility, and performance. Okay, so I've addressed the risk issue by pointing out that there is existential risk in your given network or frame of reference. And I just want to make that point that once you understand that risk of being in that frame of reference, then you have to figure out what's the source of the volatility and the performance. And if you don't understand why the asset does what it does, if you don't understand the economic physics involved, then you'll think it's random, and you'll feel like the performance is risky. But I want to give you an example of a physical metaphor. I'm a hiker, and I come across a mountain lake, and the mountain lake has 500 trillion gallons of water in it. And yeah, I don't know how it got there, but it's there. The water's chilly, it's clear, and I look down, and there's a waterfall coming off the mountain lake. And the waterfall, it's very beautiful, and it's very turbulent, right? Water is turbulent in a waterfall. Water is not turbulent in a glassy lake. So the turbulence is volatility, right? And there's waterfall. And then I look at it, and now if you look and you say, I don't know why that water falls downhill. I don't know if it'll keep falling downhill, but I hate the volatility. Then I guess you can take a selfie in front of the lake, go swimming, get cold, and leave. But if, let's say you're not a tourist, but you're an engineer. So you come across the same lake and you see the waterfall and you see the 500 trillion gallons, and you think about gravity and you think about sunlight. And now I know how the water got there. The water got there because the sun shone on the ocean. The water evaporated from the ocean. It rose up in the clouds. The wind blew it against the mountain. It condensed and it rained into the mountain, and the water ran off the mountain into the mountain lake. I know how it got there. And then I think, well, if I create a dam near that waterfall, I build myself a dam, I put a turbine on the dam, and then I drop 1 billion gallons of water. I channel 1 billion gallons of water through the dam, drop it 60 feet. And then I plug that into a hydroelectric power plant. I spin the dynamo, I make electricity. And then if I'm really smart, I run the electric power line to a village down in the valley, and I light up the village, or I light up the city. Now, someone can come along that doesn't understand physics, and they can say, good idea, Junior, but what are you going to do when the water stops flowing downhill? Well, I'm like, well, I actually think the water's flowing downhill because of gravity. Newton solved that for me. And then someone else comes along and says, good idea, Junior, but what are you going to do when you run out of water in the lake? I'm like, well, there's 500 trillion gallons, and I take out my calculator, and 1 billion gallons or whatever, it's going to last a long time. Like, well, it's eventually going to run out. I say, well, the sun keeps shining on the ocean, and the ocean keeps lifting the water out of the ocean, and it drops it on this mountain. And that's why there's water in the mountain. But you're right. There's some kind of natural limit. And I suppose there's a limit to the amount of energy I can pull off of this dam, but it's a large number. It's a lot more than your donkey cart, and it's a lot more than your steam, wood stove, and it's a lot more than your coal power plant. And maybe it's a lot cleaner than burning, gasoline. So I'm an engineer, and you're seeing performance thinking it's random, and that's why it's going to stop. And you're seeing volatility, and you're thinking it's random, and maybe it'll stop. And here with Bitcoin, the reason Bitcoin's performing is A, it's volatile, but B, it's a more energy efficient state. The water is flowing down 5,000 feet because it's a lower energy state 1,000 feet below the mountain. It's a lower energy state. You've got potential energy in the water, and it wants to go to ground, and that's just physics. The 500 trillion gallons of water is $500 trillion. And the $500 trillion of assets are sitting in real estate and currency and sovereign bonds and corporate bonds and artwork and equity. And they're invested in the stock of a company in Africa that's going bankrupt, right? They're invested in real estate in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nigeria. They're sitting in a warehouse that's crumbling. It's got a 40-year life. And so entropy and inflation, that, you invested $100 billion in a war zone, and then a war broke out, and your money got your asset got devalued. All of the things going on in the world, the war, the chaos, the competition, the inflation, the entropy, the passage of time, the hurricane, the COVID, vaccine, the COVID virus, all of these things impaired the value of your assets. The reason Bitcoin is going up, it's not an accident. It's because capital is economic mass. It is flowing from a high energy state, the mountaintop, to a lower energy state, to a more efficient state. It is steam condensing to water, condensing to ice, giving off energy, just like in any chemistry lab, you would learn this.
One of the reasons I really love this clip is because the interviewer, Tom, I believe, frames the question as kind of a gotcha question. He suggests that Saylor's language often makes Bitcoin sound inevitable, which feels like an impossible position to defend. After all, nothing is inevitable, including Bitcoin. But Saylor's response is brilliant. He breaks it down into risk, performance, and volatility. And the way he explains it is incredibly logical. First, he briefly addresses risk, acknowledging that yes, Bitcoin faces existential risk. Cryptography could be broken, there could be a nuclear holocaust, aliens could come down to Earth. Those things are technically possible, but they're also existential risks for humanity itself, not just Bitcoin. By pointing that out, he moves past the question of risk without dismissing it entirely. Then he shifts to performance and volatility, where he delivers what I think is one of the most beautiful analogies. Saylor compares capital flowing into Bitcoin to a waterfall connected to a lake, a massive, unimaginable reservoir of wealth and capital. The waterfall represents the volatile movement of that capital as it flows into Bitcoin. Now, when you see a waterfall, you don't think, wow, this is unsustainable. You instinctively understand that water flows downhill because of gravity, kinetic energy, and potential energy. It's just physics. The flow may look chaotic, but it's completely logical. And the same is true for Bitcoin. Capital is flowing into Bitcoin because Bitcoin is a superior monetary asset with the most superior monetary properties. And if you step back and look at the last 16 years, it's undeniable. The waterfall has been flowing for 16 straight years. Bitcoin's price has grown at an astounding 100% compound annual growth rate over that time. That's not speculation. It's historical fact. You are literally watching this flow of capital happen in real time. Why is it happening? Markets and individuals are actively choosing to allocate more capital to Bitcoin because it's the best form of money. It has unique monetary properties. It's scarce, portable, durable, divisible, and fungible that make it ideal for preserving wealth over time. This ties directly to a report I published earlier this year called Your Wealth is Melting. In that report, I explained how capital is flowing out of traditional assets like real estate, gold, US equities, dollars, and fixed income and into Bitcoin. The reason is simple. Bitcoin is the only asset that cannot be perpetually produced or devalued by free market competition. If you hold wealth outside of Bitcoin, you're betting that the market won't increase the supply of that asset or devalue that asset with competition. But that's a risky bet. It's just like expecting the waterfall to stop flowing. You're fighting gravity and basic physics. And with Bitcoin, you're fighting market dynamics that are just as powerful. Ultimately, Saylor's analogy beautifully illustrates what's happening. It's not about making predictions. It's about watching reality unfold. For 16 years, we've seen capital flow into Bitcoin. And based on what we know about markets, incentives, and logic, there's every reason to believe that flow will continue. That's why I think this is one of the best analogies Saylor has ever used. It highlights Bitcoin's role as the natural endpoint for capital seeking long-term safety, stability, and growth, just like water flowing to its lowest point. Of course, it's volatile because everything is rapidly getting repriced in Bitcoin. The waterfall has existed for 16 years, and it's only getting bigger. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you next time.
Pretty good stuff there, hey? I mean, a couple things just to, I know it's shitty to watch a video and then hear somebody talk about it and hear somebody else talk about it. But I mean, a couple things that I noticed in that video is the engineer aspect of it and kind of where we are today, where Bitcoin stands today, 16 years into this thing, is that if you look at who's talking about Bitcoin and who's studying Bitcoin and who's building in Bitcoin. You listen to somebody like that talk. They're engineers, they're physicists, they're everybody, like the most intelligent people on the planet. Intelligent, not like book smart, but like actual how the world works smart. Everybody there is talking about Bitcoin, and everybody there is building on Bitcoin. And it seems like the longer they spend in Bitcoin, the more conviction they have in Bitcoin, and the more things that are built in Bitcoin. And then you look at the other side of things. Just think about the two differences here between the people who are building in Bitcoin and the people who are building in the fiat system and still trying to. It's almost laughable at this point. Like you could just, if you put two people beside each other and they both gave like a 5-minute talk on where we are, where we're going, I think I would be very much. It'd be so easy to pick out who the Bitcoiner is in that conversation, honestly. And that just goes to show, how far we are ahead of most people in the knowledge aspect of this. And I was listening to, or I was reading the Stone Ridge letter from, what's his name? Ross Stevens, the founder of NIDIG. And I was just thinking about how well he speaks and how the analogies that he was using and the stuff he was talking about in there, it was just mind blowing to me. And I'm actually going to be talking about it over these next couple of weeks, specifically about that letter. I'm going to break it down to a couple of different components. But the point that I wanted to make was that people like Ross, people like Saylor, only once you've been in Bitcoin for a while, and once you have a basic understanding of a certain number of components within Bitcoin, does this stuff really make sense? Because if you don't have that underlying knowledge about Bitcoin, somebody could talk for half an hour like Saylor, like Ross Stevens, and you wouldn't really understand what they're saying. You couldn't connect any dots there. So you have to actually put in a whole bunch of work within Bitcoin to understand the fundamentals there before you can actually appreciate how good Bitcoin is. And that's one part of it. The second one was the $500 trillion in capital that they were talking about. And what that is that if you look at the worldwide assets right now, they're 900 trillion total. And the analogy that he makes there is that approximately 450 or half of the 900 trillion is in just a store of value place. The other half is actually being used. It's circulating, but half of that 500 or 450 trillion is just simply being used for a place to store people's value, whether that's in real estate that they're not using, gold, bonds, things like this, where people are just trying to maintain their purchasing power that actually aren't doing anything. They own assets that don't actually do anything. And so he predicts that all that wealth is eventually going to flow into Bitcoin, just like a waterfall into a lake. So if you think about where we are today, we're at about $2 trillion market cap. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but as that analogy mentioned, it is inevitable at this point, as long as Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure, that capital is going to flow into Bitcoin. So we're going to go from a $2 trillion market cap to approximately 500 trillion in fiat terms. That's kind of the first stage here. From there, once that's done, the only cap on Bitcoin truly is our own imagination, because it's going to continue to capture our, we call it GDP now, but our productivity. And it's a very flawed term and a very flawed measure in fiat terms. But when you can measure the Earth's potential and productivity, that all is going to flow into Bitcoin. There's really no cap on that. And that's why it's entertaining to me when people try to tell me that the math is off when I say that one sat is equal to $1, because they're still thinking in the fiat terms. They're still thinking that 900 trillion is like the maximum human productivity that we can achieve. And in my opinion, it's about a fraction of it. So people who will tell you that Bitcoin will never hit $100 million because it doesn't make mathematical sense don't have a clue what they're talking about. Because Bitcoin's going to not only unlock the world's economy through micropayments online, but it's going to be able to capture human productivity and human imagination. That's kind of our only cap within Bitcoin forever. So whenever somebody tries to tell you that our maximum is 900 trillion, our human potential is 900 trillion measured in a fake, illusionary, corrupt, centralized system, it's bullshit. There's no cap here. There is no cap on Bitcoin. I see some